June 13th, 2024 Planning Commission hearing. I will call the hearing to order at 1 o'clock. Ms. Johnson, can we have a roll call vote?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I'll take roll call. Chair Bauke.
Here.
Vice Chair Wardlow.
Here.
Commissioner Barnwell.
Here.
Commissioner Boss.
Present.
Commissioner DeLuccio.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to preliminary matters. First is requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or additions of ex-agenda items. Ms. Arciniega, do we have any of those?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. We do not.
Okay. Next is announcements and appeals. Do we have any of those?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. We do have one very important announcement. It's Commissioner Lodge's birthday today.
All right, very good. Can we sing?
Can we sing now?
You're welcome to. I'll abstain.
Okay, who wants to lead? Okay.
Well, go ahead. I'm not a good singer, but I think we should all sing.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sheila. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you all.
Okay,
I
thank
wonder if
you.
that's ever happened at a planning commission meeting before.
I don't know. Breaking new ground. We're a friendly crowd. Okay, so I do have a couple ones just to remind the commission that we have our joint Planning Commission City Council meeting on July 26th at 9 a.m. Make sure that's on your calendar. And another one which the Garden Street Hotel appeal to the City Council has been continued indefinitely until there's some answers back from FEMA, is my understandings. So with that, we'll move on to our next portion of the agenda, which is review considerations of minutes and resolutions, and we have none. So unless somebody else has something we don't know about, we're going to move on to public comments that are not on items on the agenda, and I don't see anybody in the audience. Do we have anybody online?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. At this time, we don't have any virtual participants, but we did receive written correspondence from Sullivan Israel that was distributed to the commission prior to the hearing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bauke.
Okay, with that, we can close general public comment and move on to item section number 3, which is new items, and we have an item at 133, 135 East Ortega Street. And the purpose of this hearing is an ADU concept review and comments. And before we get started, I presume, but we may not, do any of you have any ex parte communications that you need to disclose? I see no movement on that. So with that, we're going to move on to the staff presentation. We'll have Associate Planner Pilar Plummer for the staff presentation. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I'm Pilar Plummer, Associate Planner with the City of Santa Barbara Planning and Zoning Division. I'll be giving the staff presentation on this project. So the project involves conversion of existing commercial buildings located at 133, 135 East Ortega Street to a 25-unit residential apartment complex. The project currently is proposing approximately 2,416 square feet of demolition and 2,286 square feet of additions. The project also includes resurfacing of the parking area to provide for 11 parking spaces, new bicycle parking, which would be one for each of the residential units, and then hardscape and landscape improvements throughout. So to the right, this is a view of the existing building. This is the area where there would be parking for the project. Just as a reminder, the AUD program facilitates the creation of multi-unit housing, supporting the construction of smaller units within walking and biking distance to commercial services and activity centers, and allows for increased densities with development standard incentives for certain zones within the City of Santa Barbara. The program was approved by City Council in 2013 and has been monitored and amended on multiple occasions to better fulfill its intended purpose. In December of 2023, the AUD program was amended to change from a trial period with an expiration date into the city's permanent multi-unit housing program. So the purpose of this afternoon's hearing is Planning Commission conceptual review of the AUD project, and as well to provide comments to the applicant, to staff, and to the Historic Landmarks Commission on the design, overall improvements, and consistency with the city's general plan. HLC would be the decision maker on the project when that is formally submitted. So on the screen, you'll see an aerial view of the project site outlined in yellow. It's on the corner of Santa Barbara Street and Ortega Street. It's also adjacent to the Santa Barbara Historical Museum, which includes historic resources, and is close to Anacapa Street. So this is an aerial view of the buildings here. These are the Quonset huts that are also on the property. And this is the current area used for some parking that would be repurposed to provide 11 spaces. To the left is a view of the project site from Ortega Street. Both of these buildings are on the property. This looks into the covered canopy area, which I'll be describing in more detail later. This is a view on the corner of Ortega Street and Santa Barbara Street. To the left here is a view of the parking area with the current apron that accesses that area of the property. To the left is an adjacent development that I'll provide some more details on in a few minutes. And then to the right is a view from Santa Barbara Street looking down into the property at the Quonset huts. Just for context, I mentioned this at the site visit. But adjacent to the parking area is 117 East Ortega Street, and there is currently a project in process to convert this residence into a duplex, as well as to develop a two-story fourplex behind, so that would be a total of 6 units. The project was conceptually presented as a one-time pre-application consultation to the Historic Landmarks Commission in December of 2023. At that hearing, the Historic Landmarks Commission generally noted that the size, bulk, and scale are appropriate. These are existing buildings and are essentially being just repurposed to provide for residential housing. So therefore, they found it compatible with the neighborhood. The HLC did request some additional information as to the covered canopy area that the applicant was including in their overall open yard totals. Some of their comments include to making it more light-filled, and if you recall in one of the photos, it did appear quite dark in that area, so whether there was going to be an increase in skylights. They also had one commissioner suggest a model to help the HLC understand that area and how it would function for the project to provide open space for the residents. And just below is an elevation of it. Again, there's not really much changes happening to the buildings because they are being adopted for residential, but this area right here, which is currently accessed via a driveway apron, would be enclosed with glass, so it would no longer be able to be accessed from Ortega Street. These are the findings that the Historic Landmarks Commission would need to make in their approval of the project. Before they granted project design approval. Generally, the Historic Landmarks Commission, as I said, has expressed positive feedback on the design and concept, but the Planning Commission is requested to provide any comments as it pertains to these. So the consistency with design guidelines, compatibility with the architectural character of the city and neighborhood, size, mass, bulk, and scale, sensitivity to adjacent landmarks and historic resources, whether it responds appropriately to established public vistas and existing scenic views, and then use of open space and landscaping throughout the project. This is a zoning consistency table that was included in your packets. So the project is consistent with the zoning ordinance either by meeting the requirement for the zone or by requesting a modification for what does not comply. In this case, the only one of note is the open yard. They're required to provide 5,230 square feet of open yard on the property. That's 15% of the overall net lot area with minimum dimensions of 20 by 20. They are meeting that. However, as I mentioned, a portion of their open yard was included under the covered canopy structure. So that's what staff noted as likely needing a modification for the project. So to the right, you'll see a proposed roof plan, and I have another couple slides to show you as it pertains to the open yard, but this existing building, the Quonset huts, this is that canopy structure. So in general, the AUD program allows for an alternative open yard design, which again is 15% of the overall net lot area. Open yard in general is supposed to be open to the sky, unenclosed. There are some exceptions in the zoning ordinance to allow for 20% to be covered. However, this particular area of the project, when we were reviewing it during the PRT review, did appear that it would need an open yard modification because it represented a significant portion of the overall open yard area that they were proposing. Staff hearing officer would be the decision maker on an open yard modification if they were to move forward with that. So to the right here, you'll see a preliminary landscape plan. And to the right is again that view under the covered canopy. So again, the canopy has these existing skylights here towards the back. That's the Quonset huts, and there's some more outdoor space being provided towards there. So really, this landscape plan, it's a little bit unclear because if you'll go back to the last slide, you'll see the canopy structure roof line carries over towards almost all the way to the Quonset huts. And so here would carry along pretty much here. So a lot of that area that you're seeing here with landscaped area, that would actually be covered by that structure. There's also a fire lane here that was reviewed during the PRT. So this was really the only area that was left exposed for open yard space. The findings for an open yard modification are that the modification needs to be consistent with the general purposes of the title, so the zoning ordinance or the zoning district that it's in. Also that the modification is necessary to accomplish any one of the following: to secure an appropriate improvement in the lot, prevent unreasonable hardship, result in development generally consistent with existing patterns of development, or construct a housing development containing affordable units rented and owned according to the city's affordable housing policies and procedures. And again, these would be what the staff hearing officer would review if a modification was pursued. The parking requirement, just to go over that in a little bit more detail again, the project site is in the central business district, so the requirement is 0 spaces. They are allowed to provide a maximum of 1 per unit, so that's 25 spaces allowed. They're again providing 11 spaces here. Bicycle parking is 1 per unit, and they do need to be covered and secured. So during the PRT review, staff noted that they are showing their bicycle parking here, but again, that's in their covered canopy section. So when they submit their formal application, they'll still need to demonstrate how it would actually be covered and secured. So some ways they could achieve that are bike lockers or having a designated bike storage room, something like that. The plans that they submitted showed 28 spaces, so a little bit more than actually is required. And I do want to note, I didn't cover this, but private open yard isn't required since they're doing the alternative open yard option, which is that 15%, but they do have these little patio areas that are included for the Quonset hut apartments. Another thing that they would have to demonstrate in their formal application is how the open yard area would work with access for access to the units. This wasn't included in your packets, but I did mention it at the site visit. So staff has not done a formal review to confirm that this option would meet the zoning ordinance since it wasn't included in the PRT review. But the applicant is considering it, so I did want to present just this slide to give you something to think about with relationship to the open yard modification. So one idea that they had was to swap the parking for more outdoor space for the residential units. So that's this green area here, which they were previously showing to have 11 parking spaces up against the building wall. They would also relocate the fire lane to this portion of the property. They would still keep the canopy structure and just have that as part of their overall total for the residential units for sort of an outdoor-indoor living space. But yeah, potentially that would eliminate the requirement for an open yard modification if they were to do that, but it swaps so they wouldn't have no more parking as part of the project. As far as meeting parking, again, because of their location, the parking requirement is 0, so they would still be satisfying parking if they decided to go that direction. And this is just a rendering of what it would look like under that canopy structure. If you were looking, this is towards Ortega Street here. It's a little hard to see, but if you'll remember on that elevation, there was this glass opening that was replacing the canopy opening that currently is there on Ortega Street. So that's what that represents, some nice murals, landscaping inside. Okay. In terms of density, the project site is in the high density tier. And they are allowed to do 28 to 36 dwelling units per acre. Under this tier, 28 units would be allowed for the project, and the project is currently only proposing 25 units. The average unit size for these units is 523 square feet, which is less than the 1,090 square feet that they would be allowed to do. These units are studio units within the project. I will also point out that the project site is in the priority housing overlay, which would allow for higher densities, up to 63 dwelling units per acre, and that would net a total of 50 units with an average unit size maximum of 811 square feet. However, again, the overall intention of the project was to preserve the existing buildings on a site that has been occupied for commercial use, so that's kind of the direction they're going with this project. The project also is subject to the inclusionary housing requirements, so they do need to provide 10% of the units constructed and offered at an affordable rent as moderate income units, which is 80 to 120% of average median income. So that's 3 of the 25 units designated for moderate income households, and they don't have a in lieu fee requirement for the project. The project is consistent in terms of general plan consistency with the land use element. So it's consistent with allowed uses in the zone and land use designation by providing multi-unit residential in the downtown neighborhood of the city. The general plan does include policies which encourage a mix of uses in commercial areas, and having housing is an important long-term goal of the general plan, especially affordable housing. One implementation policy is LG 51, affordable housing to provide housing to low, moderate, or middle-income households. In terms of the housing element, as you know, the city has very little vacant or available land for residential development. There are housing policies which support build-out or infill within urban areas of the city. It's also encouraged to repurpose buildings from commercial to residential. And I do want to also point out that this particular site is not included in the suitable sites inventory of the housing element. The project, as I said, provides 25 new studio rental units to the city's housing stock, comprised of 3 moderate and 22 market rate units in an area designated for high residential densities. Therefore, staff did find it was generally consistent with the housing element. And again, I do want to point out, while more units could be provided on the lot by demolishing all structures and doing a larger development, the overall intention with this project was to repurpose the existing commercial buildings. The existing site doesn't contain a historic resource, but as I mentioned, it is adjacent to properties that do have historic resources. So 715 Santa Barbara Street is a city landmark and California state landmark, and 117 East Ortega Street, the one on the other side that's being redeveloped, is a contributing historic resource to El Pueblo Viejo Landmark District. Thus far, the HLC has provided comments that they find the project design in relationship to historic resources within this site vicinity supportable. And then in terms of the circulation element, long-term goal is while sustaining or increasing economic vitality or quality of life, the city should be providing alternative forms of transportation and mobility are so available and so attractive that the use of an automobile is a choice, not a necessity. So as I mentioned, this project is providing 11 vehicle spaces, 28 bicycle spaces, which is a little bit more than the requirement for the project. The site is also within the central business district and near public transit. So dependency on vehicles is minimized with this project. In terms of environmental review, this is in the pre-application phase. We've only done a preliminary review of the project. They haven't submitted their formal application. So once they do that, we would be going further into our environmental analysis for the project. As I mentioned, they're within proximity to historic resources, so they must show with their design, however they decide to go about it, sensitivity to adjacent historic resources. We've also requested some technical studies, an archaeological resources report, and a site investigation for an underground storage tank due to the unclarity of whether it was removed or not. And in terms of the staff recommendation for the project, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission provide comment and recommendation by majority vote regarding the proposed design and improvements of the project's consistency with the city's general plan, and feedback on the potential open yard modification. And all of your comments and recommendations will be communicated to the HLC when it's submitted in our formal application. That concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Gorin. He's representing the applicant team.
Thank you, Ms. Plummer. Next will be the applicant. When you're all plugged in, please state your name for the record, and you have 15 minutes to make a presentation.
All right. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning. I represent the applicant, and Ms. Plummer did a really good job going over the application that's in your package, and she talked a little bit about this alternative design, and I'm going to talk some more about that. First of all, Commissioner Barnwell asked on our site visit, like, why are we doing this? Why this project at this location, given the densities and things we have, and you know, a lot of other people might ask that question too. So I think it's good to answer it here. So we are in the priority housing overlay, high density. That's the city's updated map. This is our project site right here. And so what we could do here is we've got this lot size, like 3/4 of an acre, maybe bigger. We've got up to the 63 units per acre density. We could do 50 units. We could actually do up to 75 if we were to do the full density bonus on this. And then we can go up to 48 feet under the city's regulations. And then I think we can even go higher than that in density bonus. We can get concessions on it. So that kind of a project, it's doable. It presents issues in downtown areas like this, especially when you're next door to historically significant structures and all. And there's other issues in terms of cost. These types of projects cost a lot more than what we're proposing here. And another side effect of that is generally you have to do larger units to make those projects work. So in addition to more units, they have to be bigger. You have to have more stories. It just kind of cascades throughout the project. And I'm not making a value judgment on it. I do projects just like that. But it's one way you can go. We're going a different way on this project. So what we want to do is basically recycle and repurpose the existing buildings on the site. And that results in no visual changes really to the neighborhood. So I'm not going to spend any time showing you the buildings. You can see them if you drive by. There's no new potential impacts to the adjacent historical resources. And we're hoping it will be a less onerous entitlement process just because there won't be so many significant issues that you would encounter putting a huge new building next to these existing resources. And there's a much reduced financial risk. So this project is in the millions of dollars. One of these other large, full-scale AUD projects is in the tens of millions of dollars. So we're getting a lot of units out of this, but the risk profile is a lot more favorable. So Ms. Plummer showed you the current concept. There's some driving things in this concept. First of all, that canopy, I'll make that really obvious on this plan, because in this project, the canopy's sort of been the thing that everybody's talking about. And that's our concept for the canopy, is to turn it into this sort of indoor-outdoor lobby that we think is going to get pretty intense use in this project, especially since the unit sizes are on the smaller side. This provides sort of a communal living room for everybody. The other thing is this parking. So this proposal has parking in it, 11 spaces where that existing parking area is. Then there's this fire lane, and I'll get to that later because that's a factor which has some flexibility to it. And then this proposal includes an addition to that two-story building at the corner. It's about 600 square feet of an addition. So this alternative concept, we want your comments on this too. This is our preference. I'll just say that up front, that we'd probably be taking forward now that we've looked at it more. So I'll put that site plan behind here. So in this case, the fire department has told us they're not going to require a fire lane here. I suppose it has to do with changing the occupancy to residential, which is a less intense hazard classification. But anyway, we don't need a fire lane. We were considering one where the parking was, but it's actually not necessary. And then we're going to forego this addition to the building and leave the footprint the way it is. So again, that was about 600 square feet. It doesn't change the number of units. It just reduces the average size of the units through the project. So the one that you've got in right now is about 523 square feet, and this reduces it down to like 504, which is still a really nice size for a unit. And we do tons of ADUs in my company, and we do lots of them that are 500 square feet, and they have all the amenities, including individual washer dryers. It's a very comfortable unit. It's not big, but it's very efficient. And then we would like to get rid of the parking and keep this area open, and I'll get into that later. And then we're going to keep that canopy structure. So I want to go through the open space, because that's really, this project's just unusual because there's nobody here. I mean, we're keeping things the way they are. It's a low impact project in terms of changes to the community. And so really the issue on this project has been the open space and the open yard. And we've been looking for ways to avoid having to do this modification. So I want to go through how this project allows us to avoid that. So we've got the 34,864 square feet. So 5,230 is the 15% target we have to get to. And then once you take the fire lane out and you take out that building addition, it opens things up. It gives us back a lot of the square footage we need to make our open space comply without a modification. And then Pilar brought up the point of you can't count these major egress routes. So this 4,260 square feet is exclusive of things that would be ingress and egress. So that's the actual open space number. And then we would have this covered open yard. That's can be up to 20%. There's some conditions. It's got to be under a structure that's open on at least one side, and the height of the structure has to be at least 7 feet taller, and this is way taller than that. So this is the portion of it that we're going to count as that. There's flexibility. I suppose we could count more, but this gets us to the number. So that's 975 square feet. And so what we end up with is hitting the number. And we can do that entirely within basically the developed portion of the site. So that leaves us this area over here, which I'm just going to call this surplus open yard. We basically want to land bank this. It isn't necessary to meet open yard requirements in the project, and we don't want to develop it with parking and have parking that's tied to this project and then kind of inhibits what you could do with this property someday. It could be developed with additional units potentially. It could provide access to the project that's next door as that gets further developed. There's just a lot of things you can do with this land besides parking. And we want to leave it open so that we have opportunities to do something with it. And you're not considering any future opportunities there as part of this proposal, but this proposal includes, I guess, the bookmark for something we could do there if we leave this open. And so we would propose to just landscape this so it looks nice in the meantime and goes along with this project. And this also has benefits in terms of stormwater runoff and those types of things. So this is a view looking down that sort of main entryway in our open space. And this is where that building addition would have been, is right in here. And so taking that out really opens this up and gives us, I think, over 1,000 square feet more open space in there. And then that's, of course, that was the same view from before of under that canopy. And so since we're proposing to get rid of the parking as part of this alternative concept, I just want to go through and just get this in front of you and on the record. And sorry, that's a little blurry on this screen, but we have two completely separate and independent sets of regulations that basically make it that we don't have to have any parking here. So the first one is the city's AUD ordinance, and in the central business district, you don't have to have parking, and you're only allowed to have one per unit. So Ms. Plummer went into the reasoning behind that and trying to transition out of cars and into other forms of transportation and not use up our precious real estate for cars. And I support all that personally. But the other regulation that we have is from the state. So this came into effect early last year, and this prohibits agencies from imposing a parking requirement on residential projects if you meet certain conditions, and that condition is if you're within half a mile of public transit. And public transit doesn't mean just like a bus station. It's really specific. I guess it's got to be a big bus station. What it is in this case, the city's got this little version of this map. The map actually comes from Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, and this is off their GIS. But this is a blow-up of downtown Santa Barbara, and that green area is the half-mile radius around our major transit stops, the way AB 2097 defines them. So that's the MTD Transit Center down at Carrillo and Chapala. And then there's the train station, which also meets that definition. And so our project site is within that half-mile distance. So the city actually can't require us to put parking on here. And that would support a finding or by your commission that that's appropriate. And sometimes people in the community get upset about that. There's bigger issues afoot. What are we going to do with parking overall in the downtown and everything like that? But that's beyond the scope of this project. So as it is right now, parking isn't required, and that's the basis to support it. So I'll leave it at that. I can answer questions if you have them. And that's my presentation. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Barnwell, did you have a question for the applicant?
I
Or
do.
you want to clean up your mess and get back to it later?
No, that's okay, I got it. I just spilled my water here, so I'm doing two things at once. The zero parking allowance, it comes from two sources. One is from the state, and then the other one is the fact that this project is within a certain distance of the public parking lot. Is that correct or not? Does that ever, if you wanted to not park, would your proximity to that building, to our city parking, would that allow you no parking as well, or not?
So Chair Bauke, Commissioner Barnwell, That's even a third regulation. Yeah, when you're within proximity to the parking structures, basically, the city has zones of benefit, which allow you to reduce what your parking requirement would ordinarily be. But for practical purposes, in residential AUD projects in the central business district, the AUD ordinance eliminates the parking requirement like in its entirety. And then on top of that, sort of the nuclear elimination of parking is AB 2097 from the state, which just flat out eliminates the requirement within half a mile of a major transit center. So the city was more forward-thinking than the state when they came up with their AUD parking standards, and then the state took it to the next level.
Megan, you had a
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Chair Balke, do we need to open public comment?
Well, we're going to, we haven't
Okay.
got there yet, so.
Okay, this was just applicant presentation. That was it. And I would concur with the applicant's description that that's the third element, the downtown parking reductions based on proximity to garages. As he characterized, it's AUD projects downtown don't require parking.
Okay, with that, Donald, do you want to have a question now, or do you want to wait?
I have a
till-
clarification, actually. We went in our packet, we have a different plan, that went before HLC, and now this, your revision is in front of us. Is this something we're looking at today, or are we looking at the original one? What was noticed?
Thank you. Through the chair, Commissioner DeLuccio. So that comes up a lot. The way that the program, AUD program is set up is that the staff, the pre-application review team, the design review boards, and the planning commission are reviewing and commenting on the same set of plans, conceptual level project, in the chance that you could disagree in an approach because you're looking at it from different lenses of land use policies versus design versus other elements that the PRT team is looking at. So the idea is to give comments back to an applicant using the same set of plans, and that then they can go away and design their formal application. However, it's inevitable that in those steps of process, as time evolves, there's always ideas that come up as to how they might start addressing the initial comments they've received. Staff does allow the applicant to let your commission know what they're thinking, but your comments today are supposed to be on the plan presented, but you can certainly address their ideas in concept. But first ask is to address the project that the HLC reviewed, and if you have any agreements or disagreements or concerns on that design, and then if there are additional comments on the applicant's request.
Just one more question. Either the applicant or the planner can answer the question. Did this, you were before HLC, and did this evolve from your discussion with HLC, what we have, what you have in your plans in front of us, in addition to the original plans?
Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, this evolved beyond HLC, and a lot of it's in response to HLC input that we had. They had a concern over the amount of open space that was being provided under the cover. So nobody was concerned with the total statistic of the square footage, but they were concerned with the fact that the majority of it was under the cover versus open to the sky. And so one of our responses to that is to change this so that it actually just meets the letter of the ordinance now in terms of being open to the sky versus the 20% that can be covered. The parking, that's our decision. The HLC didn't really comment one way or another on the parking. And the buildings are, for practical purposes, they're exactly the same between both of these things.
Did they comment that perhaps their better use of this would be to have more housing here?
Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, one of the HLC members said he totally disagreed with our approach here and thought we should bulldoze this whole site and build the maximum number of units. And the rest of the commission did not they didn't really take that up or concur with it.
Okay, can we, well, let's go to public comments, and then we'll go back to the commission on questions. Do we have any in-person speaker slips?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. At this time, I haven't received any speaker slips, and I'm not seeing any movement, so I'll go ahead and move to virtual public comment. We do have one hand raised for Steve Johnson, so I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to speak, and you'll just have to unmute yourself. You'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I'd like to make maybe 3 points. The first is a question as much as a point, but as staff pointed out, the site is not listed in the inventory of suitable sites. And I am baffled as to why that is the case. It's located in the priority housing overlay zone. It's a critical zone. 67% of all units built or proposed in the last cycle were in the priority overlay zone. Our only chance to make housing numbers is to maximize development in the zone. Why was that site not in the suitable sites inventory? And more specifically, might ask whether the applicant requested the site not be included in the inventory. I ask that because there's a strong, being in the inventory creates an incentive to build to the maximum possible density. And really, in theory, I'd like to correct one thing that the applicant said. With bonus density, we proposed that the site could create 75 units. It could actually create 100 units. With AB 1287, just came into law in 2024, applicants can get 100% bonus density easily. They just have to put in 15% low income of the base density, 15% of 50. That's, they need 8 units of very low income, 8 units of moderate income, and those 8 units of moderate income count towards their inclusionary requirement total. I know the PC doesn't like hearing that, but there's a state judicial opinion that's already held that to be the case in another jurisdiction. So the site could accept a lot more units, and I don't know why that's not happening. But if the site was in the suitable sites inventory, then Housing Element Program HE15 would apply, which would give the PC the right to not allow development, because the PC might find that we're never going to make our goals if they don't produce the maximum amount of housing. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more comments?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. At this time, I don't see any further hands raised, but we did receive written correspondence from Stephen A. Johnson that was distributed to the commission prior to the hearing. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair Bauke.
Okay, with that, we can close public comments on this item, and we'll move back to questions, and Commissioner Wiscombe is on the board.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. This is for the applicant, Mr. Gorin, if you come up. Since we're supposed to comment on the original plans, what percentage of open yard, I know there's part of it that's uncovered and part of it, and a substantial portion that's covered. What are the percentages in the original plan?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Wiscombe, I think in the original plan, it's around 60-40. 60% was under cover versus 40 or so that is open.
Okay. And is there any opportunity, or are you thinking about doing something with the skylights other than cleaning them?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Wiscombe, our expectation is that whole roof's probably going to have to get replaced. The structure of the canopy is really sound, but the roof is, as you point out, it needs more than a wash.
Okay.
And we're probably going to double the amount of skylights that are there when we put back the new roof
Okay.
and get more light in there.
Okay, good. And I want to just go to accessibility. The Quonset Heights units have lofts, so they're not accessible for mobility issues. Is that correct?
Chair Balke, Commissioner Wiscombe, not exactly. They're at-grade units, and so the ground floor has all the amenities in it, and it would comply the way they are. And then we also have a bunch of other units in the project that flat out comply because the entire unit's at grade. So, and we also have accessible routes of travel to everything. So the project will comply.
Okay. And can you just go over the ramp? You had a drawing of that. Can you, I don't, do you still have that in?
We do. Actually, staff's plans are probably show it better than the smaller versions I have here. If you could go up to those. And go, yeah, you're gonna have to go. There's a plan in here that shows a proposed ramp coming up from Ortega Street. It might be on the landscape plan.
Okay.
Yeah, you can kind of see it there in the halftone in that taupe area. We have a grade difference there, as you saw when you were out on the site, and you've got, I think we can only go to 5% on a ramp. And so to get up to the height of the site, you've got to do a pretty convoluted thing with switchbacks and all of that. So I would say at this point, in either of these concepts, we're still studying where we're going to get that access. We have different opportunities for it. We have opportunities around the Santa Barbara Street side. We have opportunities through the surplus open yard area side. We have the potential to have an opening down in that lower left corner where the window is out to Ortega Street. We're probably going to ultimately end up putting a door in that in either of these scenarios. And we've got space within that open space that you could run a ramp up inside of that. So we're still studying that and trying to find out what the exact requirements are going to be. But we do have a lot of different ways that we can meet those.
Okay, thank you for that. So going back to the open yard, on the plans that are in our packet that we're considering, 60% was covered, 40% was open. And you're going to put in some more skylights. And then in your preferred alternative concept, and I gather the word is preferred, this is.
Yes, that's our preference.
Okay. You've got 81%, so you've met the 20% enclosed, maximum 20% enclosed. So you've got 81% open, and then the rest of it is covered in those little spots. And I'm curious, how did you pick those little spots?
Chair Balke, Commissioner Wiscombe, they're completely arbitrary. I mean,
Okay.
we could pick whatever of that square footage we want out of there. Those seemed like obvious spots, and they were close to the edge of it, I guess. So since they were
Okay.
contiguous with the other open space, we picked those.
So the goal is to keep the surplus square footage in more of a confined unit okay. Okay, and that's the end of my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Chair Balke. First question for staff. The PRT letter, it references areas of concern or items that needed to be addressed, and you mentioned access to or through the open yard space. What were the other items that needed to be addressed?
Thank you. Through the chair, Commissioner Ball. So just in general, we were looking for more information on how the open yard would function. Number one, what percentages, which Mr. Cord gave to you, as well as, let's see, the height underneath the structure, what percentage would be covered, how it really met the intention of open yard for the project. Again, it's supposed to be open to the air, how it would work with access egress, such as front porches, landings, stairs, ramps, other required access egress on the site plan and open yard plan were supposed to be included in the plan set as well. So that summarizes it.
Thank you. And do you feel like all those questions were answered, or we're waiting for the final application?
Through the chair, Commissioner Ball, again, we haven't evaluated the alternative option that Mr. Gorin is presenting. He would still need to present that information in his formal application, but just, looking conceptually at it, especially with the supplementary area, with eliminating the parking, they would be more than meeting their open yard, it appears, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then another question for staff it comes up in a lot of projects, but I know that we just began a study on a few of the housing element policies to be implemented, and one of them is potentially increasing inclusionary housing, changes to density bonus. When will those policies be in place? Because I'm thinking about all these projects that are coming to us, including this one, that they're doing the bare minimum. So it's 3 units when potential changes could produce a lot more affordable units.
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Ball, so yeah, the requirement is that they provide 3 inclusionary, and it's a good question. I might ask Ms. Arciniega if you can respond, at least as far as the timeline goes for those policies.
Thank you, through the chair. Commissioner Boss, I don't have an update on the time frame of those. The projects would have to be, and it depends on how they're written in terms of implementation. Some new standards apply only after if a project hasn't been deemed complete yet. Other times, they apply if you haven't received your building permit issuance yet. So it also will depend on the timing and the implementation requirements for that. But certainly, this project has the potential of making it through without being subject to those requirements, depending on how fast they move. But we can certainly report back on those programs.
Thank you. And then a couple questions for the applicant. I want to clarify, are all of the units accessible or ADA compliant?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Boss, the units on the second floor of the main, I'll call it the main building, those don't have accessibility to them because we don't have vertical access in the building, but we have more units are at the ground floor and are accessible, so we're not required to have to do that.
Understood. And then I was pleased to hear that you're going to replace the roof, but I'm curious why it sounded like leaning toward putting in a new canopy space, so why not just reduce the canopy that would be covering the open yard?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner Boss, my client really likes that canopy. We like the idea of the covered outdoor living room. It's important to him. One of the first things I talked about was, hey, super, we can just reduce it and meet it. It's important to him to keep it, and so we're going to comply with the open space in a different way, and that canopy becomes an additional amenity rather than something we're getting an exception for.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the slide where you talked about, why you went with AUD and adaptive reuse, which great, instead of demolishing the whole space and building up. But you mentioned that right now there's more, risk and more financial risk if you were to just build from the ground up, but there's more reward as well because you'd have more units, and so the pro forma would look a lot different. But I'm just curious if you can talk more about that. Even with the existing sites, you could go up to 28 units, and you chose 25.
Yeah, Chair Bauke, Commissioner Boss, risk reward is a really big deal to developers, and the city doesn't usually get into project economics, but I'll give like a really short version of it. So there isn't a huge amount of additional profit margin necessarily in doing the much larger project. So let's say you were investing in your own stocks and you were going to get a 10% return on something, and one choice you had was to invest $20,000 and get a 10% return, which you might not get at all depending on what happens. And your other alternative would be to invest $10 million and get a 10% return, which you might not get at all. So yes, the 10% of $10 million is a lot more money, but you have to tie up $10 million to get it, and it's all at risk. And there's a lot of difficulty coming up with much larger amounts of money like that and financing. And the financing climate right now is not ideal. So like us and every other applicant you see in front of you doing projects, what we're all counting on is that a few years from now, when we're actually doing these projects, that things are going to be better and these will all be financeable at that point. So everybody is speculating on that, and there's reason to think that it will be better, but that would be a really good reason why it's more attractive to do this project than the mega project.
Okay, so the profit margin, that helps me. Thank you, those are my questions for now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm concerned about both people and plants. And Commissioner Wiscombe's question about the skylights helped answer that. So there will be, one of the sheets showed 8 skylights over in the roof that's provided the enclosure. Okay, so that's going to happen, because I wasn't clear on the site visit what was going to happen with those, but.
Chair Balke, Commissioner Lodge, so we're going to increase the amount of skylights that are there to get more light in. One of the things that HLC asked us for, in addition to things like the renderings that we showed, was specific information about planting types and what kind of light would be in there, and that we would have plants that are going to work in that kind of light. So that's the additional detail that they wanted us to come back with, and that we ultimately will be coming back with.
Okay, well, I share their concern. I know you have some artificial turf in there, and I was wondering, are you going to have artificial plants too? But you have this fairly inclusive list of real plants, so I hope those will thrive in that atmosphere. But also, I want, how many of the units are interior? That is, they don't have windows out to the exterior. It looks as if, and then it looks as if Unit 12, I'm sorry, which it's on sheet A2.2, there aren't any windows indicated on it, although it fronts on an Ortega. Is that just?
Chair Balke, Commissioner Lodge, I mean, they have to have windows for egress and all that. May just be something that didn't get picked up since this is in concept. But when you say interior units, do you mean that face the interior of the project, or do you mean completely landlocked within a building?
No, I mean without any windows out to open sky. And there's one unit that's clearly looks into the covered area.
Yeah, Chair Balke, Commissioner Lodge, there are going to be a couple units that look into the covered area, and that's something we're going to see in projects that people get creative with. I think the Housing Authority did one over at where Sur La Table used to be. Brian Cornell did that. I walked through it with him. None of those units have windows to the outside. They get their light through skylights and through skylights in the hallway. And my understanding is there was a lottery or something to rent those units out, and people seem to like them. I mean, it's totally different than anything I would think of living in, but these are different times.
Yeah. Well, in the early 20th century is when building codes began to be adopted, and to get away from these windowless, airless interior apartments or rooms that were entirely interior were very common in really dense cities like New York. I like you, I also walked through that project, and there was enthusiasm for renting them, but it certainly isn't ideal. Let's put it that way.
I guess to go back and answer your initial question, it would be, I think, 4 units are in that building, and I don't even know if this condition applies to all 4 of them, but all the rest of the units in the other buildings all have exposure directly to the outside.
Yeah, I noticed that, yeah. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Next, Vice Chair Wardrow.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I appreciate all the questions from my fellow commissioners. I feel that the majority of my questions have now been answered. I will ask staff, though, per the public comment that was made, why this site was not included on the suitable inventories list in the housing element.
Thank you for the question through the chair, Commissioner. So it's not totally clear why. Just in an overview of the site inventory map that's available, not every parcel, right, is included within the priority housing overlay. There are some properties that are nearby this one that are included on the suitability site, but in general, it was intended for vacant sites in areas where we anticipated that they could be readapted to residential use, and this particular site, it just wasn't included in it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have one question for the applicant. And I very much understand that this is in no way a requirement, but I just have to ask, understanding that you have acknowledged that technically this could have been a site that we could build, significantly more housing on. Would the applicant be open to considering additional affordable units at varied income levels?
Chair Bauke, Vice Chair Wardlow, this seems to come up on every project. I mean, we're complying with what the city's rules are. The city has been over this issue ad nauseum for years. They came up with the standards they have. Applicants like us and everybody else need to be able to count on what the city's standards are, and that's what we're doing, and we're going to comply with that. The same way that you expect us to comply with your setbacks and height limits and stuff, and not come in here saying, well, I know the ordinance says 48, but can't we really consider 60? We've got rules, we've got requirements and percentages, and we have to have the certainty we can count on those, and we're gonna stick with those. And the other thing I would say is, these are 500 square foot studio units, so nothing's cheap in Santa Barbara, but as units go, these are the most, quote, affordable by design that you can get in terms of sizes of units. So I think they'll be more accessible to people because of that, and the whole project's like that, so.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yes, we acknowledge that, the minimum requirements that are set by the city is what guides kind of the way in which you approach the project. And so I appreciate Commissioner Voss's questions to staff regarding when the updates will be coming, based on the fact that applicants, move forward with the minimum requirements. They do not move forward with higher efforts to achieve affordability. My last question is, who is the applicant behind this project?
It's Ed St. George, SBID LLC, but it's Ed.
Okay.
And also, in terms of that housing opportunity site, like when that was, I don't think he owned this property when that happened. So Mr. Johnson made a comment as to, did this, owner request not to be included? That's an impossibility in this case, but I can't think of an owner that would have requested not to be included. It's beneficial to be included in that. So these units are above and beyond what the city identified as what it would make its target with.
Thank you. I appreciate that's the remainder of my questions.
Megan, you had a comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bauke. A couple of clarifications. I received some information from long-range staff. First, on the suitable sites, it appears that this site just didn't meet the criteria which all suitable sites had to meet. There was an analysis of ratio of land improvements and land value and had to meet that criteria. So it just didn't qualify. And then the second is the anticipated timeline for inclusionary changes are expected at the end of 2026, at least now.
Okay, thank you for that. Next, Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the applicant, I'm wondering about, by the way, thanks to all my fellow commissioners. They asked many of the questions that were on my mind, but I'm wondering about bicycles. I've noticed that the bicycle world has changed dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. And I wonder if it applies to bicycle parking. So when you say bicycle parking, in the modern world, and I don't know the answer to this, does modern bicycle parking include electric hookups, so you can charge a battery like you do with a car? Does it include a wider bicycle space? And I'm only saying this out loud because I think it might, and so there's no requirement. But it seems like bicycle spaces are getting more, they will be more and more important. Certainly in this project, if there's no parking, they're going to be important. And we kind of toss it off of bicycle parking. So anyway, a thought of what is your bicycle parking going to need to do to meet these modern standards of bicycles? Anyway, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you thought about that?
Chair Balke, Commissioner Barnwell, we do think about that. The bike parking right now is proposed in a double-decker rack. Certainly the lower levels of that rack would work for e-bikes. Of course, some people have these e-bikes with motorcycle tires on them.
Right.
And I mean, in my opinion, as an e-bike rider, a real e-bike rider, those are motorcycles. There's no difference between that and a moped, and I almost question whether that is bike parking or some other kind of parking. But in terms of providing power and all, it's not too challenging to provide power available where the bikes are parked. And in some other projects, we've actually have like rooms that are like extra storage for people in the units, and they have ability to do the bikes in there. But in this case, it's a lot of bikes trying to fit on this site. Again, now that we're handling the open space in a certain way, we may have more room to look at it. But yeah, it's something that we're definitely looking at carefully, because that's when you don't have cars, a lot of people have those bikes.
Right, and thank you. And they will have those big tired, quote, almost motorcycle bikes, which
Some
don't
of them
fit
will.
into bicycle parking the way we think of bicycle parking.
Yeah, I haven't really delved into the specifications on the bike parker. I know it can accommodate some wider tires, but I don't know how wide of a tire it can get to.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner DeLuccio.
Yeah, I think most of the questions have been asked, some really good questions. I just want to go back to the original plan, and the overhead. So I'm looking at, you might want to put it on, some of the skylights. Basically, the original plan was reducing the number of skylights of the roof that was going to be left from 8 to 4, correct? Did 8, from, what was it, 8, 12 to 8?
I will, my answer to that, Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, is that may be what the plans depict, but I can't say that's intentional. Sometimes people don't pick things up on plans. I mean, the number of skylights is really whatever we say it can be. And so our plan is to put more skylights in there. And if those original plans don't depict that correctly, that's an error.
When it comes for HLC, you'll be flushing these out more. Will they know exactly how many skylights there'll be at that point before they sign off on the plans?
Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, yes, they will, because at that point, we won't be in a concept stage. We'll have a much more detailed set of plans, and they did specifically ask about that. So we're going to have a lot of detail about that to satisfy that direction we got from them.
Right, because their concern was about light, correct? The other thing is, on the original plans and the new plans that evolved, they'll both have the passageway, right? You're going to be eliminating some of the roof in the original plan, correct? I think it's like some of the skylights and some of the roof of the structure to make a passageway.
Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, in terms of the canopy roof, we want to keep the same dimensions it has, but I think what you're speaking to is there is an existing section of building that goes between where that canopy is and the main building, and yes, that's getting demolished to create a paseo into the middle of the project.
Both plans? On the original plans and the ones that evolved?
Both of them.
Okay, they'll be gone.
Correct.
Because it looked like a canopy with skylights on the plan.
Yeah, that'll be open between that canopy and the former Coca-Cola building.
And then you made a comment in regards to the new plans you're going to be presenting, something about you're going to switch out the parking to use it for the required open space. And then you alluded to something in the future that perhaps it could be earmarked for housing or something?
Yeah, Chair Balke, Commissioner DeLuccio, we're actually going to be meeting our open space requirements within the developed area of the site. So the area that Yeah, let's get that plan out.
Thank you. Sorry. Hey, might as well look at the plan.
Yeah, let's look at the plan.
Didn't mean to interrupt you.
There we go.
Okay. So, right now, whoops, let me see here. Okay. So, right now, within this fuchsia colored rectangle, that's the developed area of the site, and the way this is designed meets the open space entirely within that. So that leaves this entire, I think it's roughly 7,500 square feet area over here, which is just extra. And so we really, I call it land banking as a former developer. We're keeping that land available to be used for something else. And yeah, one of the things it could be used for is additional units. I think in this density here, you could get up to 10 units on that land area, and it could be used for that. There's the project next door, which hasn't been, I mean, that's also in a concept stage. We don't know 100% what the fire access requirement might be for that project, so a portion of this could be used for that. We just want to keep this, because this area isn't necessary to do this development, we want to keep it open so that it can be put to its highest and best use, either as further build out here in the future, or a combination of that and access to the other project, or who knows what. But, you know, the future is uncertain. We developers are very optimistic, but we're also really paranoid. And we have all of these great, very beneficial to us parking reduction laws and things right now that let us do things that we didn't used to be able to do. And depending on the way the political winds blow, those might all go away someday. And if this is dedicated as parking, then we might be stuck with it as parking. So we want to leave it open. And so our open space works within this rectangle, and this is all just extra. And yes, one of the things that could go there is potentially additional housing units. And if it was built out as parking, that could be a problem if that's what ultimately made sense to do there.
Did that piece of property come later to this puzzle? Is it all tied together? There's a lot tied?
Chair Bauke, Commissioner DeLuccio, this is all one parcel already.
Okay.
So this is like a piece of that parcel that we're sort of leaving out and available for other things.
Well, thank you for answering my question, because I did Monday allude to what the preference would be of the developer, and thank you for coming prepared to answer the question and to doing some more work on it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick question for Mr. Gorin. The land banked area, as you call it, what are you doing with it in this project? How is it going to be finished?
In the alternative project?
Yes.
It would be landscaped like the way we're showing it on that plan, or in some form of
So
that.
can you go back to that again? What is that?
Those are planter areas and a couple of pedestrian pathways, and, you know, we haven't gone through and picked out all of the plants yet. But
So there will be some vertical planting in the area? It won't just be flat, dead space?
correct. And we want it to look attractive in the meantime. I'm sure we'd put some sorts of vertical planting up against the big wall that's facing it. We'll also do something to make that wall look nicer. But yeah, there will be, I mean, that's something we'll get into with HLC.
Okay.
And if that's direction you have, that's what we want.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, all right, honestly, my fellow commissioners answered 90% of the questions I had. One question, and this goes back to sort of the choices as the developer was making here. I sort of wondered if there was a hybrid approach here of keeping the main building and converting it as you've got and then doing something with the balance of the property. Was that one of the scenarios you considered?
Chair Balke, we never actually considered doing that. We sort of, one avenue was just do pure adaptive reuse, and the other was do like the much bigger project. I think economically, you're like combining with the worst of the two risks if we try to do the hybrid project.
I just wanted to make sure it was considered. Okay, so that's all the questions I have. Now, we're supposed to basically provide you comments, and you've gotten some of it through the question period. So I'm going to ask my fellow commissioners for whatever comments you'd like to provide. You want to put the screen up, Ms. Pillar, as to what we're, all right. So those are the staff recommendation questions that were being asked, and I'll start with Commissioner Boss.
Thank you, Chair Balke. In general, I would like to see more light through the canopy area, and it sounds like the applicant or owner is not interested in reducing the canopy, but just more light, skylights. There was mention of the Sur La Table building and having just skylights there, and there's enthusiasm because they're affordable. These units are not affordable. Only 3 of them are moderate. So I'm concerned that there might not be as much enthusiasm without light and without affordability. And I personally live in a building that is affordable, and I live there without a ton of natural light, and it's not great. So just want to make sure that there is light, that there is more light in all of the units. I'd prefer to keep at least some of the parking, thinking about 25 units and still only having 11 spaces. It is crammed to get parking downtown in that area. I know that there's some parking changes potentially happening in the downtown area as well, so I'd prefer to keep parking on site. Affordability, just wish there were more affordable units. Just incredibly frustrated that we aren't moving that forward. I know our housing element called for the study to begin just this first quarter and to take up to a couple of years. But it's really frustrating to think about the next 2 years. We're going to have more projects coming to us with everybody just doing the bare minimum, just what they're required to do. It's not going to help us meet our goals. And part of that frustration is also that it wasn't in the site inventory, and I understand it didn't meet criteria, but that's a bit of a concern because obviously this is a site where you can develop housing either through adaptive reuse, infill, or complete redevelopment. But I am excited that it is adaptive reuse and infill, so that's another housing element policy that the city is moving forward. So I think those are my comments, just more light, prefer to keep parking, and anything we can do to encourage more affordable units, but it sounds like applicants are going to continue to do the bare minimum.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of feel like we are at the point where we can't really comment on parking. I hope the area doesn't become parking challenge, but since it's not required, I think we can leave it out. I do like the concept of leaving that area open and land banking it. I think that's a really interesting concept as long as it's landscaped and is attractive and not left as a piece of land that's just not developed and grows weeds. Adaptive reuse, I really appreciate that. Like Commissioner Boss says, definitely more light in the canopy. I think that's very important. I'm fine with either the 81% open yard being open and the rest being covered, but I'm also okay with if it, Mr. Gorin, you weren't quite sure, but I'm also okay with 60% being covered and 40% open. That was not, I thought you were going to have a much smaller percentage of open space, so of open yard. So, and let's see here. let's see, comments from them in terms of size, bulk, scale, and height. I think that's appropriate. It's adaptive reuse, so I think we're fine there. Development is appropriate for location and neighborhood, which is fine there. That's what's there. I think Commissioner Barnwell provided an interesting history to the Coca-Cola bottling plant. I mean, I didn't know that. I think something that might indicate that history would be really interesting on the site, that would talk about that. Let's see. So I think basically, I almost prefer the alternative plan, but I'm okay with the original plan and with the exception of the parking. That's just, I just hope the area doesn't become parking challenged, but I think as a property owner, you have every right not to provide parking at this point. And it is consistent with the general plan, and we've talked about open yard, and I think that's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lodge, followed by Commissioner Barnwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with all the comments that have been made. I think I understand the applicant's desire to do this kind of thing, and it certainly fits in with the general plan's encouragement of adaptive reuse, and this is certainly a perfect example of that. I do have concern about the parking when I think it's already parking challenged. When I got there at 8 o'clock in the morning for the site visit, there weren't any, I had to park on the site. There weren't any parking spaces available on the street. And I think the requested open yard modification, well, it looks as if you're going in a direction where you're not going to need a modification, so I'll pass that on. And to do what was suggested by the speaker, public comment, I have to agree that it would be almost impossible with historic landmarks on both interior property lines. It would just, that's what things like landmark designation is to help protect the historic resources. And so I like this project. I think it's a great example of adaptive reuse.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Barnwell, followed by Commissioner DeLucia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first comment is the adaptive reuse is stellar. And the comments made by some is that, no good deed goes unpunished. You're keeping all the buildings there, but some people really want you to scrape it and pack them in. And I think packing them in is appropriate some places, but this place, I think, is a good spot to have the lower buildings. View studies were done a few years ago about tall buildings getting in the way of the views of the mountains, which tends to be the wrap around the beauty of our town, is the ability to be able to see those mountains every once in a while. And the view study was that we need to have lower buildings at the corners and the intersections, because that's where the view can be seen. And you've done that. So I applaud that. That's going to be an asset that very few people even realize is going to be built into what you're doing. I echo the comment about the Coca-Cola building. As a boy, I used to watch those bottles go around, and I think it'd be cool to have a little plaque up there mentioning that. Insofar as the canopy creating open yard space, I'm totally down with that. We live in a world where the idea of open yard space is not what it used to be. I would say classic examples are hotels built by Porter. There's one in San Francisco, the the Bonaventure in LA, where you walk into the lobby and it goes up 30 or 40 stories. That's open space, even though it's covered by a roof. And that space that you've created, I think, is going to be an interesting tableau to begin to do things for the people that are in there. So I'm totally in favor of that. The parking issue, I want to come down and probably become boring on this topic throughout any other conversations. But we have had, as a city, we have had many planning discussions about housing and how we don't want to require parking like we used to. But everybody still has cars. So the question then becomes, it was mentioned here, parking challenged. We are parking challenged, and the answer, we're getting there, and the answer to that is going to be us figuring that out. For example, I mentioned to you that because you're within the zone of benefit of the downtown parking, you didn't have to have parking. But that's for commercial daytime parking at $3 an hour. No one who lives in an apartment could use that type of parking. And so as we go on and we provide these units that don't have a requirement for parking, but people still have cars, then the question becomes, how are we going to address that need as a city and as planners? I don't know how we're going to do it, but I can see in the future a problem arising, even though I applaud the idea of we don't want too many cars, but the fact of the matter is there are cars. I'm not sure how the public access, I'm not sure what the public access is under the canopy. Like, can people come in there? Would you be able to open it to the general public? One of my cause celebs is places to hang art. If you had a public art space in there, or you could become part of the public art projects that the city puts on by having reserved wall spaces for that, maybe not unlike we do here in the City Hall, where the City Hall is only open for a period of time, but the art is available there. The ADA access, my personal preference is that the ADA access needs to be at the front door, not off in the corner, because I have many friends who use wheelchairs and they're always shuffled off into some other way. It'd be nice if they could be at the entrance somehow. I want to go back to that bicycle parking thing. You phrased it better than I did. They're motorcycles, and they're going to become more in the size of a motorcycle. So when we talk about removing all parking spaces for automobiles, and we say offhandedly, we're going to have bike spaces, I think we need to address what those bike spaces are really going to provide for. And I think you're correct. They're more like motorcycle spaces, which aren't bike spaces in a design sense. Architecturally, I prefer the one that doesn't have any parking, which isn't the one in front of us. But the one in front of us now, I'm totally down with that. If that's what it ends up being, I like it. I like almost everything you did there. If there is no parking and that ends up being the project that goes through, have you thought about using the vacant lot as a temporary place for people to park during the 5 or 6 years you're waiting to see what you want to do with it? Because that would be an important component also. I just really like the adaptive reuse. I like the idea that you guys truly analyzed the highest and best use and saw the one that had the least risk and could get built. And I applaud you for that. I can't think of anything else I would like to say. My fellow commissioners have mentioned it all in comments. Good luck.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner. Next, Commissioner DeLuccio, followed by Vice Chair Warlow.
There's not much to say, but I can always say something. Actually, we're just complicating this, which I agree that an art component would be great. And some cities actually have art components. They actually, as you know, require you to put a percentage of the building value into art on site. So I know we don't have that plan in the city of Santa Barbara. Also, it was great that you're doing the adaptive reuse. I actually like the evolution of the project into what you're evolving it into, and that actually wouldn't require the parking modification. However, leaving the enclosure up on some of the opens. It would be on some of the open, maybe not on the open space any longer, but having an enclosure, going back to HLC, they're still going to require the lighting, that there's lighting there. So you're still dealing with the lighting issue. So that, I guess, is directional about the covered space to be a living room, a live living room, for example. I'm disappointed about the parking. I understand under our code, the central business district, you did not, when we had that, you didn't, we still have that, you don't need to have the parking. However, AB 2097 complicates that further. I think in the future, it'll shake out some way when enough buildings are built, and we'll see if there's enough parking for everybody, or some kind of modification has to be done by the state or the city. Maybe, maybe in terms of the parking structures. I kind of like the suggestion. I know you don't want to tie it down, that to become parking as part of the development. So in the future, you'd have to perhaps continue whatever you do to supply the parking. But I like the idea about a public parking type of situation where if there could be parking there in some kind of public way, like you'd offer it to the public, and maybe in turn offer some to the units that you're building. I don't know, that would be a suggestion, I think. Let's see what else. I also think this does fit into the general plan, as far as it's respectful to the two historic buildings. It is supplying housing, and it doesn't matter, I don't think it matters if it's 25 or 28 units, because we round up to how many affordable there would be at 10%, it's still going to be 3. Again, I would have liked to have seen you do more units, I guess, if we can't make it mandatory, I guess, in this case. But I just feel like you have that, I'm not in agreement exactly with the land banking. I would have liked to have seen, if you have that land, to do something with it, and maybe a compensate, if it's not parking, just have some more housing on it so we can get some more affordable housing in the city. But those are my comments, but overall, what you are doing and proposing, and you are proposing it to the letter of the ordinance, I'm in agreement, and you know my little frustrations with it, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Next, Vice Chair Warlow.
Thank you, Chair Balke, and thank you to my fellow commissioners. I think I concur with a lot of the comments made here today, and thank you to the applicant. I'm definitely supportive of this adaptive reuse infill project. I think this is a really great example of this, given the location. I'm also really appreciative of the fact that you're bringing in smaller units to the downtown core. I think that there's a lot of people in this community that will be very interested in these, so I think that that is great. Given that you're no longer requesting an open yard modification, I do concur with my fellow commissioners, or some of them, regarding that. I would like to see parking, because I am nervous about, 5-10 years from now, that area that currently is, you can drive up and find parking, that probably will change. And so that's a little nerve-wracking, but I'm excited to see that you guys are going to invest, into really great landscaping. I really agree with Commissioner Barnwell's comments regarding public art and open spaces. When we talk about land banks, I don't know if that means we could still have like picnic tables and things so that folks could go and utilize the area outside in that space as well. That would just be a comment I'd like to see. Clearly, the project is consistent in terms of the size, bulk, and scale, given that it exists already in the neighborhood. I also agree with a lot of the commissioners' comments and appreciate the applicant's efforts on increasing the skylights and having more light in this area, because I do think that's really contributes to the livability of this space, especially when we're talking about really small units, so that the areas that the residents will use in the common spaces and with the open yard will be more important because of the small units. I concur with city staff that this project is consistent with the general plan, given the policies that we have on the books today. I do think that this is a prime example of why it is so important that we move forward with updating our policies to require a higher inclusionary, because in every aspect of the goals of our general plan is to increase varied affordability at various income levels. And we are not achieving that in any of the projects that we are seeing, because as pointed out by the applicant, the developers view this as a requirement. This is not a floor. The 10% is not viewed as a floor. It is viewed as the requirement, and once you check that box, then that's it. And so if our goal that is stated multiple times in the general plan is to achieve varied affordability, then we as a city have to implement policies that require that, because we have seen time and time again that developers are not going to voluntarily provide that as an option. So again, I'm supportive of this project. I appreciate the adaptive reuse. I'm excited to see it move forward. I would always like to see more affordability, and I hear you that that is something that the city must take action on in order for developers to move forward with proposing projects to address it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair. Okay. My comments are pretty consistent with the commission as a whole. First off, I think using the property as an adaptive reuse project is appropriate and honestly is the logical choice at this point in time, considering current financing and construction costs, because there's a lot of projects that come before this body have been approved and are sitting waiting for better scenarios on both those two factors before they're ever going to come out of the ground. I do appreciate the concept of land banking. I think that's appropriate in this case, especially since we're just doing the adaptive reuse. I would suggest that we use that area as parking as an interim, not as a requirement, but as an interim thing until such time you have clarity as to what you may be using that land bank parcel for. I definitely concur with Commissioner Barnwell and DeLuccio's comments regarding the larger parking picture for downtown. And we need to start looking at it as a system in which the parking structures are used as much for residential parking and the evening and night hours as the parking structures are used for commercial purposes during the daytime. So with that, I don't have any more comments, and unless anybody else is there anything we need to do, Megan, at this point? We have to come up with one of those, huh?
Oh, no. We did that before.
Chair Baki, we have a request for a public comment on an item not on today's agenda, which is a portion of our agenda we've already passed. So the request is if there is any ability to open that up again.
Sure, as soon as is it related to this, or should we conclude?
No, not on, an item not on today's
Okay,
agenda.
we'll do that
General
as
comment.
soon as, okay, so are we posted now? You've heard, there's definitely very much similar comments from all the commissioners. Are we to now distill them, or can you do that?
Chair Baki, the request usually from staff, if Pilar doesn't mind, is generally that your commission make a recommendation, a majority vote. So the idea is that you can, a generalized statement on the items that you guys are in agreement on. Any discerning comments or, dissenting where you guys had different opinions are captured in your comments individually. But in general, we look for what was the general direction from your commission to the HLC. So a generalized statement that you would all agree on.
Okay, who wants to take a shot at it? All right, we got Commissioner Boss. Okay, we'll go for it.
Take a start. I think all of us agreed that we would look for more light through the canopy area and consider parking challenges. I heard consensus on both of those.
No objection. Yes.
That we appreciate the adaptive reuse. We going to comment on the open yard modification? My opinion is I'm okay with, since they're going to present an alternative plan, I'm okay with either one. Would we agree on that? Okay, and I think we all agreed with where most of us made comments about the historical significance of the Coca-Cola bottling plant and a possibility of recognizing that, and also, which would be beneficial for HLC to hear, I think, and also the art component. Perhaps there could be an art component that could be shared with the public at, maybe an evening or something like that, but that was another comment. And I also think a couple of us asked about ADA accessibility, and I agree with Commissioner Barnwell, and if the rest of my fellow commissioners agree, I think we should comment that we try to get accessibility by the front door, which is where it belongs. And
I have one. Respect for the historic buildings, where we agree that this is compatible with the neighborhood and respectability of the historic buildings.
yeah.
The 2 historic buildings.
And also, if the area, the land banked area is not used for parking, that it gets planted with vertical plantings and some perhaps flatter space, so it's attractive.
Okay, there seems to be
Is that
consensus
good?
on that. Okay. That's good. We'll call that a motion unless you need, you need something else.
Chair
Yes.
Balkovec, maybe if we can just summarize it, and then we can just
Read that.
provide it in the motion. Are you able to summarize kind of what was just provided? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I can summarize those. So look for more light through the canopy areas and consider parking challenges. You appreciate the adaptive reuse. You're okay with either option in terms of the open yard. Most commissioners agree with the historic significance of the Coca-Cola bottling plant and suggestion to include, I don't have full language, I'll have to watch the video back, but to include that in the design somehow.
Recognition of
Yeah, and then perhaps there could be an art component that could be shared with the public. Suggestion for the ADA accessibility to be by the front door. Agree that it's compatible with the neighborhood and sensitive to the historic resources. And if the land banked area is not used for parking, that it gets planted with vertical plants so that it is more attractive.
Okay, I think we have consensus, so do we need a motion on that?
I'll second that, if
All right,
that's
so-
appropriate.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, don't see any. So with that, Ms. Johnson, can we have a motion for a roll call vote? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair Bauke. I'll take roll call vote. Commissioner Boss?
Yes.
Commissioner DeLucia?
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge?
Yes.
Commissioner Barnwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe?
Yes.
Vice Chair Wardlow?
Yes.
Chair Bauke?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so we're going to loop back to general public comments. So we have a request to speak on an item that's not on our agenda. We'll do that, and then we'll go to the administrative agenda after that.
Chair Balke, if I may too, of course, the chair could open up public comment, and just if we could also leave it open after public comment, accepting any public comment till, I'd recommend 2:45, so in case anyone else online, since we're reopening it.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll do that. Okay, state your name for the record.
Thank you, Kristen Snedden, and thank you for the latitude of reopening public comment. You're a very efficient commission, and I came in late. And I just simply wanted to wish the Honorable Commissioner Sheila Lodge a very happy birthday, and to share what an icon you are, Commissioner Lodge, and a historic landmark yourself, and what you've contributed so much to this community, and a personal hero of mine, and often inspires the question of what would Sheila do? And today was no exception. Champion for historic landmarks, open space, livability, light, air, views, and I just wanted to voice my appreciation for you. Thank you.
You missed
Thank you.
the birthday song.
Yeah,
Yes,
we even sang
did you hear that?
Want to sing happy
It's a
birthday?
historic moment this morning, or at the beginning when my colleagues all sang happy birthday. You're going to have to watch that.
Yeah, she'll have to watch.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Ms. Johnson, has anybody joined in on Zoom possibly?
Thank you, Chair Bauke. At this time, we don't have any virtual participants.
So with that, we'll wait another 30 seconds and then we'll start. While we wait for that, the Edgewater Way 2399 is postponed to July 11th. So if anybody was looking for that, that's not happening today. All right. So
You're good to go.
okay, can we start? Okay, so moving on to the administrative agenda. We have our committee and liaison reports. Do we have a staff hearing officer liaison report?
No
Commissioner
report.
Boss. Okay, then all the rest of the commissioners have all kinds of other committees and liaisons. Do any of you have a report on any of your committees? I see none. All right, and we have no discussions on subcommittees or workshops that I know of. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 2:45. And that will conclude the June 13th, 2024 Planning Commission meeting. And our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for a few weeks in the future on Thursday, July 11th, 2024 at 1 o'clock. Thank you all for being here.